Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I painted Azrael from the board game Batman Gotham City Chronicles by Monolith board games. And the fun thing about Azrael is that you get to play around with a lot of reds and yellows and do some non-metallic metal (NM), but also some object source lighting (OSL). And with all these abbreviations in the mix, it's time to get painting. So first thing I did is prime the model in bright gray primer and a bright gray undercoat, because we're going to be painting a lot of bright colors, reds and yellows. It's easy to start bright, but you can start black as you want, but you might have to go over the bright parts a lot more. Now I'm going to start with the reds, and for that I'm using corn red. Already a nice and bright red, but we're going to pick that color up just even a little bit more than this. Now this model has a lot of reds and yellows, and for the reds I'm also taking into account that he has a flaming sword, which is going to reflect on the red cloth. So we're gonna do that later on. For now, we're just base coating everything in the same color. Now once you're done, you should have something like this. There is a piece on his chest that is red. He's wearing a kind of cloth around his waist, which I also painted red. The next step is Corvus Black, which is a nice, very dark gray actually. It's not really black. But what I like about this Corvus Black is that it's, instead of, for example, Abaddon Black, this is a more non-reflective black, if you know what I mean, because it's mostly gray. And it looks like, it gives the illusion of a matte black color. Now in the end you should have something like this. There's a piece on his arm showing inside the hood. There are some bands around his chest and around his legs as well. I also painted the inside of his eyes black with a white dot inside. Now with Dumble Brown I'm going to be painting all of the metallic golden parts. This is a nice base coat for your NM metal look. Start off with some browns. There is a lot of it on this model because he's mostly wearing his gold armor underneath the cloak. And in the end you should have something like this. The arm's mostly covered in this color. Also the hilt of the sword. Now for the red we're going to be picking that up with some Mephiston red. Focusing on the upper parts, the raised parts of the cloak, leave the shady parts as they are. But I think I'm covering about 60-70% of the cloak with this color. Just to give it that nice and bright look. Usually you have to imagine where your light source is, but with a flaming sword in hand it's quite obvious where the light is coming from. Next I'm washing it with some Carbro Crimson to get some shading in there. With the shade you kind of blend the previous two colors together and you get some nice dark spots in between. Don't overdo it because you don't want any dark blackish clogs in there, but just give it a nice subtle touch here and there and make sure that the paint is spread. It doesn't really pile up in a corner or something like that. Once this is dry, we're going to be dry brushing the entire cloak with some Evil Sun Scarlet to make it even brighter than it already is. And for this I'm focusing mainly on the top parts, the shoulders, the top of the cloak, but also give it some edge highlighting as well. Then we're going to pick that even more up than it already is with some Fire Dragon Bright, which is kind of an orangey glow. And for this I'm focusing on smaller areas and I'm kind of blocking out the area that I want to paint, thin down my paint, And next I am kind of pulling the paint towards the brightest part to get a nice transition from the previous layers to this brightest part. This always works very nice when you paint a solid middle focus point, which is supposed to be the brightest part, and next thin down your paint and start working towards that brightest part, so from dark to bright. That way you get a nice fluent transition from A to B. Now once this is done, you have something like this, and as you can see I have painted the left side of the cloak, the hood, as the lights were to be coming from the sword, so only that part is lit up. The same goes for the cloak. So the left part of the cloak, right to the viewers, is the brightest part. I painted the inside of the cloak and also the lines on his mask with some black Templar. You can use Abaddon black or whatever black you have lying around, but this really spreads quite easily and leaves a little tiny part of that red shining through. And then it's time for some yellows. With some Iandan yellow, I'm kind of washing the brightest parts of the cloak again to even more blend those colors together and give it a glowy effect. You can go over the red parts as well a bit to create the illusion of a glow. Next is highlighting the blacks with some Ashen Gray. I'm covering all of the blacks, give it an edge highlight, and pick out some of those raised areas and the parts that would reflect the most light. So that's the front of the inside of the cloak, for example. And I'm picking that up even more with some Administratum Gray, highlighting that even further. I'm picking out some details on the bands on his chest, also his signature brand, the cross, is it a cross, on his chest with the circle around it, and also the tiny blade that is stuck in there, give that an edge highlight as well. Next I'm going over that with some Iron Jaws yellow as well, thin that down quite a bit, just to give it a subtle glow, because the light is bouncing off the sword, hitting his chest and hitting the brightest parts, which would reflect this light, of course. Also touch a tiny bit of the inside of the hood, because I wanted it to remain dark, but it should reflect something. Now for the gold parts, we're going to be highlighting that with a mixture of Doomble Brown and Balor Brown. Going over most of the gold looking parts, but leave some of that darkness shining through on just behind those edges, you know what I mean? So you get some natural shading in there without actually using a shade. Usually a shade paint would stick behind those edges, those deeper parts, but you can get the same effect you're doing it this way. Next up, I'm highlighting that even more with some Balor Brown and repeating the process, but decreasing the area that I'm painting. So focusing on those most reflective parts, which would be the very top, the part where the light is coming from above, and make sure that everything below the sword is lit up, of course, according to where the light is coming from. And for example, the back of the boots can be darker. Next up, Everland Sunset, and we're approaching that gold look. Again, I'm decreasing the area that I'm painting, focusing on the edges, focusing on large surfaces, and using the same blend technique. So first block out a full color, a bright part, and next thin down your paint quite a bit and pull your paint towards that brightness. So to create an illusion of transition in color. Well, it's not an illusion, it is a transition in color, actually. Don't forget the hilt of the sword as well, as it's also a golden part. And I'm working my way all around this miniature. Make sure your paint is not too thin, otherwise you're gonna get these strange spots that I often have and I have to redo it, and it's always kind of figuring out what the best consistency of paint is. Now once this is done, I'm using Wayland yellow again to create that same glow on the gold parts, so on the armor parts. Focusing on the upper parts, so the parts that would bounce off the light, and leaving the bottom as it is. And then an extreme highlight of Everland Sunset with a mixture of palette witch flesh to get that really reflective areas in there, that the shine, so to say. So I'm focusing only on very, very tiny spots. Just a subtle edge highlight here and there. But that really helps you sell that gold look. Next is the sword itself, the flamey part, and for that I'm using Dorn Yellow as a base color, because it's nice and extremely bright, and that sword is the source of all light on this model. Now when doing flames I always love these contrast paints. I'm starting with some Wayland yellow, and good thing to take into account when painting with contrast paints is that you can't highlight, you can only darken it. So you start with the brightest color. Make sure that there are no puddles of paint clogging up at one point, so spread it around quite a bit. And once your bright color is done, you pick it up with a darker color. And for that I'm using Bale Red to get to those nice and reddish part of the flame. You kind of blend those colors together. It's preferably done when still wet. Both colors are still wet. You get this nice transition. Now I wanted the sword to be a bit brighter, so I mixed some white scar into the Dorn Yellow to really make that look like a searing hot piece of metal. Final detail on the top of his head. The original art shows some lines in there, so I'm using Abaddon Black and create those two subtle lines on top of the hood. You can go all the way to the back of the hood, so take that as far as you want it. And then all that's left is the base, Ashen Gray for the base color. And I'm putting some null oil on top of that to really make those cracks reappear. Make sure to let that dry before you dry brush it with some gray sear or any bright gray you have lying around. And I wanted a tiny bit of that sword's fiery glow on the base as well. Of course, this is purely optional. Basically everything you see here is purely optional, but you know what I mean. I'm using some Wayland yellow to create a subtle glow to the base as well. Of course, it doesn't have to be really bright because it's a bit farther away from the sword, but it's nice to have that into your model. It's a tiny detail that really sells the illusion of a glow. And here's our final result on Azrael. It was a lot of fun to play around with light, with non-metallic metals. This is a lot of techniques into one miniature, and I really enjoyed painting him. And I hope this video was of any help to you guys. And if it was, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And also please consider subscribing to my channel, my Patreon page and my YouTube channel. And I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.